Hello everyone. Today we're going to look at something referred to as frequency distributions. So when we use statistics for psychology, we're looking at a population from which we collect sample, right? So when we look at sample, it can be just one member of the entire population or it can be a group of members from the same population. Now, when you collect a group of members from the same population, it's again not one, right? So you need to make sense of what each score of the group means and what that group as a whole represents as well. So statistics helps us use numbers to simplify something that's complicated otherwise, because in psychology we'll deal with variables that are quite tangible in terms of their definitions, right? We deal with emotions, we deal with cognitive abilities. So how do we put a number on it? We define it, and then we are able to see how we can measure those things through those definitions. Now, once those definitions are set straight, we assign numbers to it and we make sense of it. So a person can score high in memory, low in memory. Now, the individual scoring is done. Now, as a group, how have they performed? And when you have the group norms, right, you can compare the individual score that one person in that group has gotten, and you can compare the group, mean or the group average. So this would tell you if this person scored better than most of them or worse compared to most, right? So this way we are able to make sense of what is normal and what is abnormal. And in psychology, what is normal and what is abnormal is something that is frequently discussed, debated on, and we're always defining what normal is, and sometimes the definition changes every day, which is quite interesting in fact. And I guess that's one of the fun things about psychology. You get to, really critically think and decide what normal is and what abnormal is, right? So moving on, let's look at the next slide. So now, so this is a study that was done by Stephen Schmidt in the year 1994, right? So he was trying to examine the effects of humor on memory for sentences. So he came up with a bunch of sentences. So in the first set of sentences, right, all the sentences had a little bit of humor in it. And the second set of sentences, it was parallelly the same information, but the information was delivered in an unfunny way or non-humorous way. So the first set of sentences had humor. The second set of sentences, same information, but then the delivery was non-humorous. I hope that's making sense. So he collected the number of sentences that was recalled for the first set, which was the humorous set of sentences, and he collected the number of sentences recalled for the second set, so the non-humorous sentences, and this was the data that was got. So if you can kind of have a look at the way that it is, right, you will be able to see for the first set the number of sentences recalled was 4, 5, 2, 4, 6, 7, 6, 6, 2, 5, 4, 3, 1, 3, 5, 5. And for non-humorous sentences, you can look at it, right? So this is the data. Now, when we look at it, it's a little too much for us to process. It's just a bunch of numbers. So how do we know which group did better or which group did worse, right? So to kind of simplify this, we can use a graph. Okay, let's look at a frequency distribution graph first before we get into a table. Now, how would a graph look? So let's kind of look at a graph where we could do a frequency distribution, all right? Meaning, so let's look at this set right here. Okay, so if I'm looking at this set right here, how many so how many people recalled only one sentence? So only one sentence, there's one, right? Now let's count how many twos are there in this particular data set. So there are two twos, right? Now how many threes are there? One, two. Again, only two threes are there. How many fours are there? So there's one four, two four. The third four is here, so three fours are there. So you kind of get the idea, right? We're looking at the frequency in which each number is present, right? Now, once you get this, right, you can plot a graph. So the graph would look something like this, right? So application of the frequency table, before we get into what a frequency table, how a frequency table is constructed, can you see the frequency distribution? So we saw one there, so that's just one block. We saw two twos there, so that is two blocks. We saw again only two, three, the number 3 was repeated 2 times there, so you have 2 blocks representing that. We saw 4 being repeated 3 times, so you have 3 blocks for 4. And the same thing is done for 5, 6, 7, right? So the second table, which is the non-humorous table, you again can draw a graph. Now, once we draw the frequency distribution graph, right, we're able to kind of clearly see how the trend is. So for the humorous sentences, clearly the number of words recalled was 5. So the maximum number of words recalled was 5, and it was also frequently done. So it is easier to kind of recall the humorous sentences. And when we look at the non-humorous sentences, right, the majority of the sample, they recollected 1 sentence, 2 sentence, and 3 sentences, but they were not able to go beyond that. Only a few people were able to recall the non-humorous sentences beyond this frequency, right? So we kind of can conclude by looking at these graphs that humor does influence memory. So when you add a funny twist to something, you remember it better. So maybe, you know, when you are preparing for your exams or something, you should kind of make an analogy which makes everything a little bit more funny than it actually is. Maybe you will remember it better. Something to kind of think about, something to apply this particular research studies result in your everyday life. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Here, we're going to look at the definition for frequency distribution. So I'm just going to read it from the slide. You can read it as well. A frequency distribution is an organized tabulation of the number of individuals located in each category on the scale of measurement, right? So we're looking at the frequency in which each category is present. So if you're looking at the number of sentences, how many people recalled only one sentence? Was it one person? Was it 2 people recalling only one sentence? So we're just looking at the number of people, or the number of the variable that we're interested in, right? How many, what's the repetition value? How many times does it repeat itself in the data set? So you have a lot of data with you, right? The raw data is a lot. How many times does each data repeat itself? So the, frequency just talks about the number of times it gets repeated in one particular data set. Now let's look at something called frequency distribution tables. Now that you know what a frequency distribution is, how can we tabulate it? So obviously a graph is a wonderful way to kind of analyze data, but we can also tabulate it to analyze it, right? So when you are doing statistical procedures such as your mean, median, mode calculation, your standard deviation calculation, and other complicated, complex statistical procedures, right? It is important to know how to, do your summation values, do your, subtraction, your multiplication, your squaring of values, right? And a tabulation really helps with that. More than the graph, a graph would be good for us to, get a visual picture of what the data looks like, while a tabulation would be helpful in terms of, especially when we want to do calculations for further analysis, right? So let's look at this particular data set where you have a total number of 20 different data from 20 different people. Okay, so let's look at, let's assume that these are the different the data values that we got from 20 different people. Okay, now if you look at the highest score that's present in this particular data set, it's 10. Okay, now when you look at the lowest score, it is 4. Okay, now your summation, the summation of all the frequencies would give you n. We'll kind of look at what this means in a bit. Okay, now if I had to create a table, right, this is the x value, meaning all the values that you got in the particular data set from 20 different people. So you started from 4 and the maximum value is 10 in this particular data set. So you can start with 4, go all the way up to 10, right? Because you know that the lowest score in this particular data set is 4 and the highest score in this particular data set is 10. I hope you're following me until this point. Now, the frequency is nothing but the number of times that particular data repeats itself in the distribution, right? Now, when you look at 4, how many times does it repeat? So you have only one 4 in the data, right? So you put 1 here. How many times do you see 5 in the data? So you don't see 5 at all, so you put 0. How many times do you see 6? 2. How many times do you see 7? 3. How many times do you see 8? 7 times. How many times do you see 9? 5 times. How many times do you see 10, the value 10 in the data? So there's one 10 here and another 10 here. So that will give you a frequency of 2, right? Now, let's look at this particular part that's, mentioned right here, this bullet point, which is summation F, which is summation frequency equals capital N, or the total number of values present in the data, right? So if you add all of this up, because we're just counting, right? So the total count is something that you can get from adding all of this. So if you add 2 plus 5 plus 7 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1, you should get 20. You can probably check if that's right. You can count the frequencies and see if you get 20. If you don't get 20, it means you missed counting one of the values in your data set. Okay, so this is one way of knowing whether you got it right or wrong.